Hi, Saxons. This is Ms. Masters with the second step in writing your research paper, which is creating a research question. Why do you need a research question? Because without one, you have no reason to look anything up. Your research question pinpoints exactly what you want to find out, and answering that question gives your writing a clear focus and purpose. So, what makes a good research question? All research questions should be focused on a single problem or issue. You don't want to be all over the place in your paper. It's disorganized, and you'll end up with too much to write about and not enough time or space to write it in. All research questions should be researchable. I'm sure that sounds obvious, but if you choose a question, begin researching it, and realize there's no information out there to answer it, then you need to switch to another question. It should be feasible to answer your research question within the time frame given to you when you take other practical considerations into account. Basically, you need enough time and information to be able to answer your question, and you need the right materials. If you don't have what you need to do the research, then choose a different question. All research questions should be specific enough to answer thoroughly. You want to be able to answer your question in depth without going over the page or word limit set by your instructor. On the flip side of that, all research questions should be complex enough to develop an answer over the course of a paper that meets the assignment's length requirements. If you need to write a 15-page paper, but your question is so easy to answer that you do it in one page, then you need a different question. Finally, your research question should be interesting and relevant. If no one cares about the answer to your question, then you're wasting your time answering it. Pick a question that you, your teacher, your class, your industry, or society as a whole wants answered. Let's do a little quiz to see if you can recognize a solid research question. Here's the first one. Has the population of the world increased in the past century? Is this a good or bad question? Pause the video here and get ready to defend your answer. This is a bad question. It only requires a yes or no answer, so it's never going to be complex enough to write an entire paper about. I mean, unless the paper can be just one word long. A better version of the question is, what factors have influenced population growth in the fastest growing countries? This is an analysis question. It doesn't just ask if the population has grown, but why it has grown. What has made it grow? If you were to ask that question about every place in the entire world, you'd need to write a book, not a research paper. But by specifying that you're only going to talk about a few of the world's fastest growing countries, you limit your research to something more manageable. Next question. Which national park is best? Pause the video for a second and decide if it's a good question or a bad question, and why. It's a bad question, mainly because it's too vague. Unless you're just going to give your personal opinion, there's no way to say which park is the best because we don't even know what makes a good park. A better version of the question is, what features do the most popular national parks have in common? Now you can look at the best parks based on popularity and figure out what they all have or do that makes them so popular. This is an analysis question because it asks you to look for and explain a pattern. Last question. How effective are the various types of medication used to treat elementary students with ADHD? Pause the video for a moment to decide if it's a good or bad question and why. It's a good question. It's very specific. You're going to look at medications for one type of medical issue and one population of people. But because there are multiple medications in that category, you have plenty to talk about. It's your turn to make some questions. Get out the sheet where you turned one broad topic into 10 more specific ones. Start turning those narrowed down topics into good research questions if you can. I took my narrowed down topic, history of tea, to turn into a question. The obvious question would be, what is the history of tea? But that doesn't fit the criteria for a good question. It's way too broad. Am I really going to talk about all tea in every place in the world since the beginning of time? That's a series of books, not a high school paper. It's also kind of vague. When I say history of tea, do I mean the history of tea drinking, tea ceremonies, tea pots, tea taxes? A better question might be, how and when did tea drinking come to the US? Now I know I'm going to focus specifically on the drinking of tea in one country of the world. Another narrowed down topic from my list was best tea to drink when you're sick. The obvious question to ask is, what is the best tea to drink when you're sick? But that is not the best question. For one thing, what does it mean to be the best tea? Like, what's the criteria for best tea? Also, sick with what? I mean, is the same tea you should drink when you have the flu the one you should drink when you have a stuffy nose? A better question would be, what blend of tea most reduces symptoms of the flu? Now we know that best actually means most reduces symptoms. And we know that the sickness we're trying to improve is the flu. There might be some of your narrowed down topics that you just can't turn into questions that fit all the requirements. In that case, cross them off and move on. The fact that not everything makes a good research question is exactly the reason you came up with at least 10 options. Once you've turned your topics into questions, look for the one that most interests you and best fits all the requirements of a good research question. You should definitely have this question approved by someone with expertise in the area before you start researching, even if your teacher doesn't make that part of the assignment. Your teacher is probably the best person to approve your research question, since they're the one who's going to grade your final work. But you can also ask your friendly librarian if you prefer, or if you want a second opinion. In my next video, I'm going to show you how to use North's online databases to do the actual research for your paper. See you then.